You know, there's something about dirt under your nails that feels like coming home. Even though I've spent most of my adult life in suits and heels, navigating the polished halls of the United Nations as a U.S. ambassador, my heart has always belonged to the soil. My farm on the edge of Willow Ridge wasn't just a piece of land. It was my anchor, my safe place. It reminded me who I am when no one is watching. The farm wasn't huge, but it was mine. Rows of tomatoes, corn, kale, and strawberries stretched out across the fields, each plant cared for with love and patience. Every seed I planted carried a little bit of hope with it. When I came back from weeks of stressful meetings or diplomatic missions overseas, stepping onto that soil felt like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. The quiet hum of nature, the smell of fresh earth, and the sight of green leaves swaying in the breeze were all I needed to feel grounded again. I didn't grow crops just for myself, though. Over the years, I'd built relationships with local markets and families in the community. People loved my produce because it was organic, fresh, and full of flavor. Kids would stop by sometimes, curious about how things grew, and I'd hand them a strawberry still warm from the sun. Their smiles made all the hard work worth it. But farming wasn't just about business or even passion. It was personal. Growing up, my grandparents taught me everything they knew about working the land. They believed in taking care of the earth so it could take care of you. That lesson stuck with me. No matter where life took me, I promised myself I'd always stay connected to those roots. Buying this farm 5 years ago felt like keeping that promise. At first, living in Willow Ridge seemed perfect. The neighborhood was peaceful, and the people were friendly enough, at least on the surface. Everyone kept their lawns tidy, their houses painted, and their lives private. Honestly, I barely noticed the Homeowners Association, HOA, when I moved in. They sent out newsletters about community events and reminded us to keep our properties aesthetically pleasing. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Looking back now, I realize I should have paid closer attention. If I had known then what I know now, maybe I would have been more cautious. But hindsight is a funny thing. Back then, I thought the HOA was just another part of suburban life. Annoying, sure, but harmless. Little did I know, they had plans for me. Plans I never saw coming. My farm became a point of pride for me. But apparently, not everyone shared that sentiment. To some, it was an eyesore, a messy patch of green interrupting the cookie-cutter perfection of manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. At least, that's what I started hearing through the grapevine. Whispers at the grocery store, sideways glances during community meetings, comments about how unsightly my fields looked compared to the rest of the neighborhood. It didn't bother me much at first. After all, I wasn't farming to win a beauty contest. I was growing food. For my family, for my neighbors, for anyone who wanted to enjoy honest, wholesome produce. What could be better than that? But looking back, I see now that those whispers were warning signs. Signs I ignored because I didn't think anyone would actually cross the line. Oh, how wrong I was. What happened next changed everything. Not just for me, but for the entire community. And trust me, it's a story you won't forget anytime soon. It started subtly, almost like a bad dream you can't quite remember when you wake up. One morning, I walked through my fields to check on the crops, sipping coffee from a thermos. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden light over the rows of plants. Everything seemed fine at first glance, until I noticed something strange. A patch of kale near the edge of the field looked off. The leaves were drooping, their vibrant green faded to a sickly yellow. At first, I thought maybe it was a fluke, some random pest or weather issue. But as I moved farther into the rows, the damage became impossible to ignore. Entire sections of my farm were wilting. Corn stalks that had stood tall and strong just days before now sagged lifelessly. Tomatoes hung shriveled on the vine, their once plump skins puckered and dry. Panic bubbled up in my chest. This wasn't normal. Farms face challenges, sure. Pests, droughts, unexpected frosts. But this was different. It felt deliberate, calculated. My mind raced with questions. What could have caused this? Was it an accident? Or had someone done this on purpose? I called Jake, an old friend who worked as an agronomist. He'd helped me troubleshoot problems before, so I trusted him to figure out what was going on. When he arrived later that afternoon, his expression told me everything I needed to know. After inspecting the soil and examining the dying plants, he asked for samples to test in his lab. "Don't get your hopes up," he said quietly. "This doesn't look natural." 2 days later, Jake returned with the results, and they hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had poisoned my crops. Glyphosate, a powerful herbicide meant to kill weeds, had been sprayed across my fields, not sparing a single row. Not caring about the months of hard work or the money invested, just destruction, plain and simple. The numbers were staggering. $53,000 worth of produce gone, ruined, dead. All those seeds I'd planted, all those hours spent tending to them, reduced to barren earth. As I stood there staring at the devastation, my knees buckled, and I sank to the ground. Tears streamed down my face, not just for the loss of income, but for the sheer cruelty of it. Who could do such a thing? And why? That's when I found the note. Tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck, it was folded neatly, almost casually, as if whoever left it didn't care whether I saw it or not. My hands trembled as I opened it. Written in block letters, the message was short and chilling. "Stay in your lane." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words echoed in my head, sharp and cold. Stay in my lane. What did that even mean? Did they think I didn't belong here? That my farm was some kind of mistake? Anger surged inside me, hot and fierce, but it quickly gave way to fear. Because whoever wrote this wasn't playing games. They weren't issuing a warning. They were making a threat. I called the police, of course. How could I not? But deep down, I knew they wouldn't find much. Whoever had done this was careful, calculating. They wanted me to feel powerless, to doubt myself. And for a while, it worked. I lay awake that night, replaying every interaction I'd had with my neighbors, searching for clues. Had I offended someone without realizing it? Made an enemy without meaning to? Then it hit me. The HOA. At first, the idea seemed far-fetched. Sure, they'd sent me letters complaining about how my farm didn't fit their idea of aesthetically pleasing. But poisoning my crops, that was extreme, even for them. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were involved. Their rules always felt more like control than guidance, and Margaret Hargrove, the HOA president, had never tried to hide her disdain for my farm. She'd made comments at meetings about how unsightly it was, how it lowered property values. Could she have crossed the line? The next morning, I drove to the community center where the HOA held its monthly meetings. My heart pounded as I walked inside, clutching the lab report and the note. If they thought they could silence me, they were wrong. Dead wrong. But proving it wouldn't be easy. Standing in front of Margaret and the rest of the board, I demanded answers. She denied everything, of course, her lips curling into a smug smile that made my blood boil. "We don't condone vandalism," she said smoothly, as if reciting lines from a script. "Perhaps you should consider selling your property and moving on." Her words stung, but they also lit a fire inside me. Selling wasn't an option. This farm was part of me, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away, not without a fight. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The HOA meeting felt like stepping into a lion's den. I walked in with the lab report and that chilling note clutched tightly in my hands, ready to confront Margaret Hargrove and her board of self-appointed watchdogs. The room was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of stale coffee. A long table dominated the space, behind which sat Margaret and her cronies, faces I'd seen at block parties and neighborhood events, but never truly knew. Now they looked less like neighbors and more like a tribunal. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes fixed on me as I approached. She had this way of smiling that made it seem like she was always one step ahead, like she knew something you didn't. "Ambassador," she said coolly, her voice dripping with fake politeness, "what brings you here today?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. "I'm here because someone poisoned my crops," I said firmly, laying the lab report and the note on the table. "Glyphosate doesn't appear out of thin air. Someone did this deliberately, and I want answers." For a split second, Margaret's mask slipped. Her perfectly arched eyebrows twitched, and her smile faltered. But then she recovered, smoothing her expression into one of mock concern. "That's unfortunate," she said, glancing at the papers without touching them. "But I'm afraid the HOA isn't responsible for accidents like this." "Accidents?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. And don't think I haven't noticed how much you've complained about my farm being unsightly. You've made it clear you don't want me here." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Others exchanged quick glances, silently agreeing not to say anything. It was infuriating, like they were all part of some unspoken pact to protect each other no matter what. Margaret crossed her arms, her tone shifting from polite to icy. "Let's be clear," she said, leaning forward slightly. "The HOA exists to maintain standards in this community. Your farm doesn't exactly align with those standards. Perhaps if you'd been more cooperative, none of this would have happened." Her words hit me like a slap. Was she admitting to something, or just trying to intimidate me into giving up? Either way, her message was loud and clear. Conform or face the consequences. I left the meeting feeling shaken, but more determined than ever. If they thought they could scare me off, they were dead wrong. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the lab report and the note again. Who else could have done this? Sure, the HOA had motive, but proving it would be nearly impossible. They were too careful, too calculating, and even if I could prove it, would anyone believe me? The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I started by talking to my neighbors, hoping someone might slip up or reveal something useful. Most of them avoided me altogether, pretending not to see me when I waved hello. A few offered vague condolences about my crops, but quickly changed the subject. Only one person, a retired teacher named Mrs. Peterson, seemed willing to talk. "I've heard things," she whispered, glancing around nervously as if afraid someone might overhear us. "Margaret's been pushing hard to get rid of your farm for months. She thinks it lowers property values." She hesitated, then added, "But I wouldn't put it past her to take drastic measures." Her words confirmed what I already suspected. Margaret wasn't just a nuisance. She was dangerous. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. I needed evidence, something concrete that could expose her and the HOA for who they really were. That's when I remembered the security cameras. When I first bought the farm, I installed a few around the perimeter to deter trespassers. At the time, I hadn't thought much of them, but now they might hold the key to everything. With shaking hands, I pulled up the footage on my laptop and began scrolling through hours of grainy video. It didn't take long to find something suspicious. Late one night, two figures appeared on screen, moving cautiously along the edge of my fields. One carried a backpack sprayer, the kind used for applying herbicides. My stomach churned as I watched them systematically douse my crops, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Whoever they were, they worked quickly and efficiently, as if they'd done this before. I froze the frame, zooming in as far as I could. Though the image was blurry, I recognized the logo on the backpack sprayer. It belonged to a company based in town. More importantly, I noticed something else. One of the figures wore boots with a distinctive tread pattern. The same boots Margaret often wore to HOA meetings. My heart raced. This was it, the proof I needed. But as satisfying as it felt to have evidence, I knew the fight was far from over. Exposing the truth wouldn't be easy, especially against someone as powerful and manipulative as Margaret. Still, I refused to back down. Not now. Not ever. Because sometimes staying in your lane means letting bullies win. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Armed with the security footage, I felt a surge of determination, but also fear. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. It was bigger than that. The HOA had crossed a line, and now I had proof. But proving it wouldn't be easy. Margaret Hargrove wasn't someone who gave up power easily, and she had an entire board backing her every move. I needed a plan, something smart and strategic, exactly what I'd learned during my years as a diplomat. First, I called Jake again. He wasn't just an agronomist. He was also a close friend who understood how serious this situation was. "I need your help," I told him over the phone. "Can you write up a detailed report on the damage? Something official that ties the herbicide to the destruction of my crops." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "But are you sure you want to go down this road? People like Margaret don't back down without a fight." "I know," I replied, gripping the edge of my kitchen counter. "But neither do I." The next step was hiring a lawyer, a good one. After some research, I found Alina Ruse, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney known for taking on tough cases. When I met her in her office, I laid everything out. The poisoned crops, the anonymous note, the security footage, and my suspicions about the HOA. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable until I finished. "This is big," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. "If we can connect the dots between the HOA and the vandalism, it could blow this whole thing wide open. But it's risky. You'll have to be prepared for backlash." "I'm ready," I said firmly. "They think they can silence me, but they're wrong." Elena nodded, impressed by my resolve. "All right, let's get to work." With her guidance, I filed a formal complaint, not only against the HOA, but also with federal agencies, since poisoning farmland is considered eco-terrorism. Then came the hardest part, going public. Elena advised me to hold a press conference, knowing it would draw attention to the case and put pressure on the HOA. It was terrifying, but necessary. On the day of the press conference, reporters packed into the small space outside my barn. Cameras flashed as I stepped up to the makeshift podium, my hands trembling slightly despite my best efforts to stay composed. Behind me stood photos of my ruined fields, wilted plants lying lifeless in the dirt. Beside them were blown-up stills from the security footage, showing the shadowy figures spraying my crops. "This isn't just about me," I began, my voice steady even though my heart raced. "It's about protecting small farmers everywhere from bullying and intimidation. Someone deliberately poisoned my crops, destroying not just my livelihood but years of hard work and passion. And while I can't prove it yet, all signs point to the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association." Gasps rippled through the crowd as I held up the anonymous note and the lab report. Reporters scrambled to take notes, their pens flying across notebooks. One shouted, "Do you have evidence linking the HOA to this?" "Yes," I said, projecting confidence I didn't fully feel. "Security footage shows individuals trespassing on my property late at night. Their actions match the timeline of the damage, and further investigation will reveal exactly who was involved." Margaret's name hung unspoken in the air, but everyone knew what I meant. By the end of the press conference, news outlets were already buzzing. Headlines popped up online within hours. "Ambassador takes on corrupt HOA." "Toxic turf war erupts in suburbia." Social media exploded with reactions, some supportive, others skeptical. But one thing was certain. The story had gone national. Back home that evening, I watched the coverage unfold on TV, feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this nightmare would finally end. Maybe justice was possible after all. But deep down, I knew the fight was far from over. Margaret wouldn't go down without a fight, and neither would her loyal followers. Still, I reminded myself why I was doing this. Not just for me, but for every person who'd ever been silenced or pushed around by people like her. And so, with renewed resolve, I prepared for whatever came next, because sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone else too. The fallout from the press conference hit like a storm. Overnight, Willow Ridge transformed from a quiet suburb into the center of attention. Reporters camped outside the community center, hoping to catch Margaret Hargrove or any HOA member for comment. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, divided between those who thought I was stirring up trouble and those who quietly supported me but were too afraid to say so. Margaret's reaction came swiftly and predictably. The next morning, she released a statement through her lawyer, denying everything. "The accusations against the HOA are baseless and reckless," it read. "We are committed to maintaining the integrity of our community and will not tolerate false claims that tarnish its reputation." It was classic Margaret, polished, defensive, and calculated to shift blame. But the cracks in her facade were starting to show. A few days later, I noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. Flyers appeared on mailboxes urging residents to stand together against outsiders trying to divide us. At first glance, they seemed harmless, even patriotic. But the underlying message was clear. Anyone who sided with me would be seen as disloyal to Willow Ridge. Then came the intimidation. Late one night, someone slashed my truck's tires. Another time, I found graffiti scrawled across my barn door. "Go back to the UN." Each act felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder that the people behind this wouldn't stop until I gave up. But giving up wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. Elena, my lawyer, warned me things might get worse before they got better. "They're desperate," she said during one of our strategy meetings. "That's good. It means we're getting under their skin." She was right. The pressure was mounting, and it wasn't just on me. Protesters began showing up at HOA meetings, holding signs that read "Farmers over fear" and "Stop bullying our community." Some were locals. Others had traveled from nearby towns after hearing about the case. Even national farming organizations reached out, offering support and resources. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel entirely alone. Still, not everyone rallied behind me. A handful of neighbors doubled down, accusing me of exaggerating the situation for publicity. One man, a retired accountant named Mr. Peterson, confronted me outside the grocery store. "You're ruining this neighborhood," he snapped, his face red with anger, "dragging us into your drama. This place was fine before you showed up." His words stung, but I refused to let them knock me off course. Instead, I looked him straight in the eye and said calmly, "If wanting clean food and fair treatment makes me dramatic, then maybe this neighborhood needs more drama." He stormed off, muttering under his breath. But I knew I'd planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Not everyone agreed with Margaret's tactics, even if they were too scared to admit it. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Elena subpoenaed HOA records, uncovering emails and financial documents that painted a troubling picture. Large sums of money had been funneled into accounts labeled community improvement, though no improvements seemed to exist. There were also cryptic messages between Margaret and other board members discussing ways to deal with my farm. None of it was a smoking gun yet, but it was enough to keep the momentum going. As the weeks dragged on, the strain took its toll. I barely slept, jumping at every creak in the house or shadow outside my window. Mark, my husband, tried to reassure me, reminding me how far we'd come. "You've faced tougher battles than this," he said one evening, wrapping his arms around me. "And you've always come out stronger." He was right, of course. Diplomacy taught me patience, resilience, and how to navigate impossible situations. This fight was no different. Every setback only fueled my determination to see it through. Then, just when it seemed the case might stall, something unexpected happened. A whistleblower stepped forward. Greg, a former HOA board member, contacted Elena anonymously, claiming he had information that could blow the lid off everything. He agreed to meet me secretly at a diner outside town, where he handed over a folder stuffed with damning evidence, emails detailing plans to sabotage my farm, receipts for herbicides purchased in bulk, and even audio recordings of Margaret bragging about teaching me a lesson. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. This was it, the proof we'd been waiting for. Greg looked nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup. I couldn't stay silent anymore, he admitted. What they did, it's wrong. You deserve justice. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The pieces were falling into place. All we had to do now was take them to court and expose the truth for everyone to see. The courtroom was tense, buzzing with anticipation. Rows of chairs were packed with neighbors, reporters, and even curious onlookers who had followed the story in the news. The air felt heavy, charged with emotion. On one side sat Margaret Hargrove and her team of high-priced lawyers, their faces calm but unreadable. On the other side, I sat alongside Elena, my lawyer, clutching the folder Greg had given me like it was a lifeline. As the judge entered and called the court to order, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment where months of sleepless nights, endless stress, and countless battles would finally come to a head. Today, the truth would either set me free or bury me deeper. Elena stood first, presenting our case with precision and clarity. She laid out the timeline, the poisoned crops, the anonymous threats, the security footage showing shadowy figures destroying my farm. Then came the evidence Gray had provided, emails, receipts, and audio recordings that directly tied Margaret and the HOA to the attack on my livelihood. This isn't just about property values or aesthetics, Elena said firmly, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. This is about control, about silencing someone who dared to stand up for themselves. And most importantly, this is about justice. Margaret's lawyer fired back, trying to poke holes in our arguments. He accused me of exaggerating the damage, suggested the herbicide could have come from anywhere, and dismissed the emails as taken out of context. But his words lacked conviction. Even he seemed to know they were fighting a losing battle. Then came Greg's testimony. When he took the stand, his hand shook as he swore to tell the truth. Under questioning, he revealed how Margaret had orchestrated the poisoning herself, hiring a contractor to sneak onto my property under cover of darkness. He described meetings where she openly mocked my efforts to rebuild and boasted about teaching me a lesson. The room fell silent as Elena played one of the audio recordings. Margaret's voice crackled through the speakers, cold and smug. That ambassador needs to learn her place. If we make an example of her, no one else will dare challenge us. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Margaret's carefully constructed mask slipped entirely, her face pale and tight as she realized there was no way out. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming the recording was inadmissible, but the judge overruled him. By the end of the trial, the verdict felt almost inevitable. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their decision: guilty. Margaret and the HOA were found liable for the destruction of my farm, ordered to pay nearly $100,000 in damages, enough to cover the loss and fund future projects. More importantly, the HOA was stripped of its nonprofit status and dissolved entirely. Margaret didn't say a word as she left the courthouse, her head bowed, surrounded by cameras and reporters shouting questions. For once, she had nothing to say. Back home, relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. Winning the lawsuit didn't erase the pain of what had happened or the toll it had taken on me and my community. Still, there was a sense of vindication, a reminder that standing up for yourself, no matter how hard, can lead to change. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out began reaching out, apologizing for not supporting me sooner. Some offered help replanting the fields. Others brought food or simply stopped by to chat. It wasn't much, but it meant something, a sign that Willow Ridge might heal after all. As I stood in the middle of my barren fields, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I allowed myself a small smile. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew one thing for certain. I'd fought for what was right, and won. And sometimes, that's enough. The days following the trial felt surreal, like stepping out of a storm into calm sunlight. For so long, my life had been consumed by fear, anger, and uncertainty. Now, with justice served and the HOA dismantled, I could finally breathe again. But healing wasn't just about rebuilding my farm. It was about rebuilding trust, both within myself and in the community. Replanting began almost immediately. Neighbors who had once avoided me now showed up unannounced, spades in hand, ready to help. Some brought tools. Others brought seeds or snacks for everyone working under the sun. It was strange at first, seeing people I barely knew digging trenches alongside me. But it reminded me why I'd fallen in love with Willow Ridge in the first place. Beneath all the tension and control, there were good people here, eager to make things right. One afternoon, as we worked side by side planting rows of kale, Mrs. Peterson pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I should have spoken up sooner. We let fear rule us, and that's no way to live." Her words stayed with me. Fear had driven so much of what happened, not just from the HOA, but from neighbors too scared to stand against them. In a way, this whole ordeal had forced everyone to confront their own complicity, and while apologies couldn't undo the damage, they mattered. They showed growth, a willingness to move forward together. As the weeks passed, the field slowly came back to life. Green shoots pushed through the soil, fragile but determined, just like me. I decided to expand the farm beyond its original purpose. With part of the settlement money, I built a small learning center where kids from the neighborhood could come to learn about farming, sustainability, and resilience. Every time I saw their faces light up as they planted their first seed or tasted a freshly picked strawberry, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Margaret disappeared from public view after the trial. Rumor had it she moved away, unable to face the shame of what she'd done. While some might have felt vindicated by her downfall, I didn't waste energy thinking about her. She wasn't worth it anymore. Instead, I focused on creating something positive from the wreckage she'd left behind. The real victory, though, wasn't monetary or legal. It was personal. This fight had tested every ounce of strength I had, forcing me to dig deep and rediscover who I was. Being an ambassador taught me diplomacy, compromise, and patience. But standing up to the HOA taught me courage, the kind that comes not from titles or power, but from knowing you're doing the right thing, even when it's hard. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he raised his glass of lemonade and a toast. "To new beginnings," he said with a smile. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. And it truly was a new beginning, not just for me, but for Willow Ridge. Without the shadow of the HOA looming over us, the neighborhood began to change. People started talking to each other more, organizing potlucks and park cleanups. Lawns grew wilder, gardens sprouted in unexpected places, and mailboxes became colorful expressions of individuality instead of uniformity. Life felt freer. Standing in my fields months later, surrounded by thriving plants and laughter from the children playing nearby, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the most beautiful transformations. My farm wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It was proof that even in the face of darkness, light can break through if you refuse to give up. Willow Ridge would never be perfect. No place is. But it was better, stronger, kinder, and honestly, that's exactly how it should be.